Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Let me tell you something right now. There is nothing more important than validation when it comes to my channel, which is based on the whole truth. For years, you guys have always heard at least 90% of the boxing world. I'm talking about the pro fighters, the trainers, etc., etc. The majority of them who have no agenda have always corroborated the majority of what you hear me say on this channel. Now, I'm going to finish that point, but before I do, let's go ahead and get into the actual story. So Jose Benavidez Sr., he did an interview with the Boxing Voice, and in this interview, he touched on a lot of topics. One in particular that really stood out is what he had to say about Jermall Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez. And when I say versus, I mean, who would be a more dangerous, a tougher opponent for his son? Now, I'm gonna go ahead and play a clip of what he said, and then I'll give you my take on it. Check it out. Oh yeah, and real quick, just to set this up for you, Jose was asked, if a Charlo fight presents itself, will you take the fight? And this is what he said.
There's been talks about that. You know, that would be an honor to fight Charlo, man. That's a tough fight. That's the toughest fight that I would see for David, the Charlo. But besides that, I don't really, not even Canelo. I feel more confident fighting Canelo than fighting Charlo. Charlo, to me, he's a monster. You know, I like how they fight, and you know, they're tough. You know, they're good. I think that Charlo would give David a little bit of problems, but at the end of the day, I think David is stronger and taller, and you know, I think we could definitely beat Charlo, but it won't be easy. You know. But that would be a great fight. Like I said, also, you know, that if we can make that happen, if he will go to 168, I don't think that would ever happen for now. But hopefully that would be a great fight, man, for the viewers.
Guys, you could lock up the truth in a jail cell. Throw away the key. That truth is going to find a way to break free. This is one of the most respected trainers, especially out of Mexico, in boxing right now, because of how successful both of his boys have been in the professional rankings and even amateurs when it comes to Jose Benavidez Jr. and David Benavidez. Senior is telling you from a professional trainer's perspective that not only will the Charlo fight be more dangerous than a Canelo fight, but he's a monster. He said it. He said Canelo would be an easier fight. But this Charlo guy is a monster. If you put together everything that the majority of professional boxers and trainers have been saying about Charlo, once again, it's always congruent with what you guys have heard me say. But a lot of these trainers that I'm talking about, they actually say a lot more about Charlo than I do. Usually when you hear me talk about Charlo, I'm really just saying I want to see Canelo fight him. I'm saying he's been avoiding Charlo for 5 years. And now we know why. That's usually all you really hear from me. You never really heard me say he's this big monster, he's pound for pound the best fighter in the world. You've never heard me say that. I mean, even when I tell you guys that Charlo versus Canelo is a 50-50 fight, Canelo Alvarez fans, they go crazy. How dare you say it's a 50-50 fight? Who has he fought, etc., etc. But notice, you don't hear professional boxers and trainers saying any of that because they don't have an agenda. And they're looking at the sweet science. They're looking at all of the things that Jermall Charlo does very well compared to other opponents that David Benavidez could face in the near future. I reported a couple weeks ago of what Canelo Alvarez's own trainer said about Jermall Charlo. He said he's a great fighter. He said he's tall, very talented. He's a spectacular boxer. This is what Reynoso said about Jermall Charlo. Reynoso has never called Gennady Golovkin spectacular. He's never called Caleb Smith, Caleb Plant, BJ Saunders, Rocky Fielding, Amir Khan, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., James Kirkland. Am I missing anyone? He has never called any of these fighters spectacular. The closest they came, Canelo and his trainer, they came to praising another fighter similar to Jermall Charlo was Danny Jacobs. Canelo Alvarez, he said going into that fight, this is going to be a tougher fight than the Gennady Golovkin fight. Because Danny Jacobs, you know, he has that rhythm, he's athletic, he knows how to box, he can do a little bit of everything. It's kind of crazy to hear Canelo say that because it's only common sense. If he had that type of respect for Danny Jacobs, you already know the type of respect Canelo Alvarez has for a Jermall Charlo or a Demetrius Andrade. He respects them way more, or he respects Jermall way more than he respected Danny Jacobs. That's saying a whole lot. Listen, guys, you can go back and watch my videos. Matter of fact, I said it in the post-fight video when Danny Jacobs beat Sergey Derevyevchenko. I told you guys in that video, I would not be surprised if Canelo Alvarez calls out Danny Jacobs now because Danny, he looked very vulnerable in that fight. I mean, you also got to remember he has 2 losses. He's been stopped before, then he looks vulnerable in this Sergey Derevyevchenko fight. And that's why I had a hunch he will call out Danny Jacobs. And probably about 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that fight, we heard the announcement that Canelo Alvarez was in serious negotiations with Danny Jacobs. So Canelo, he fights Danny Jacobs right after he looks vulnerable. But when Jermall Charlo is his mandatory, not to mention, Jermall Charlo didn't look good against Korobov. You would think that Canelo would do the same thing he did with Danny Jacobs. But skill recognized skill. And what you guys have never understood, and I explained this, Canelo understood that Korobov, he's a southpaw, and he boxes completely different than Canelo does. So Canelo studying that fight, it does nothing for him when it comes to preparing for a Charlo fight. Korobov, he moves around the ring. He's a southpaw. He's really just a counterpuncher. That's not Canelo Alvarez's style. So Canelo didn't want to fight Jermall when Charlo was his mandatory, but now Canelo Alvarez is willing to fight his new mandatory, Avni Yildirim. And actually, it was Canelo that requested Avni Yildirim to be his mandatory. This is not something that the WBC ordered. The WBC president admitted Canelo reached out to him and told the WBC, I want to fight this guy Yildirim for the vacant belt. But he didn't want to fight his mandatory, Charlo, that was his mandatory for 2 years. We know what time it is. So once again, when you hear what Canelo Alvarez's trainer said about Jermall Charlo, when you listen to what Jose Benavidez Sr. is saying about Jermall Charlo, now you guys really know why Canelo Alvarez vacated his belt at 160, gave his belt basically to Jermall Charlo when he was his mandatory. And before Charlo and Canelo were at 160, they were both at 154. But the difference was down there, Charlo was already the champion. Canelo didn't even have a belt. And the Charlos and Demetrius Andrade were calling out Canelo Alvarez, and he still didn't take the challenge. How often do you see a contender that's fighting just to become a world champion turn down a shot at the title? So Canelo Alvarez, he waited until Demetrius Andrade got stripped of his title, and then one of them great European fighters that Canelo loves to fight, Liam Smith, he ended up getting that belt that Demetrius Andrade had, and right away, Canelo fought for his belt. Why? Because Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound the best fighter in Europe today. That's what he is. He's pound for pound the best fighter in the world against European fighters. Until he proves us otherwise and gets in the ring with other undefeated Mexican fighters and black fighters, such as Benavidez, Charlo, and Andrade. You know, I made this point in my last video about Canelo where I told you guys he won't get in the ring with undefeated black fighters and Mexican fighters. Of course, people trying to defend Canelo, they'll always completely change what I said so it fits their own narrative. When they try to counter what I said, see, they have to change what I say, because if they try to respond to what I said exactly, they can't respond to it because it's true. And what I mean when I say they'll change what I said is they'll be like, oh, what are you talking about? He fought James Kirkland. He fought Shane Mosley. He fought Danny Jacobs. That was the exact point that I was making. He won't fight the undefeated black fighters. He won't fight the undefeated Mexican fighters. We know that Canelo has fought a lot of black fighters. We know that he's fought a lot of Mexican fighters. But look at the Mexican fighters. Just start with the Mexican fighters, for example. He had no problem fighting Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. He had no problem fighting Alfredo Angulo. He had no problem fighting Josito Lopez. He had no problem fighting Alfonso Gomez. But he doesn't want to fight David Benavidez. Why is that? Canelo Alvarez, he had no problem fighting James Kirkland. He had no problem fighting Danny Jacobs. So what's the difference from Andrade and Charlo? It's the same difference when it comes to the Mexican fighters. The ones that Canelo doesn't want to fight are coincidentally the undefeated ones and the most dangerous ones. That is not a coincidence, guys. And this is not to suggest that Canelo will never fight them, because there's going to eventually be a lot of pressure on him to take that fight. Now, especially if Charlo does get to fight against David Benavidez, because if they fight, the public is going to demand Canelo Alvarez fight the winner. Guys, the new president of the WBC is Canelo Alvarez. He calls the shots when it comes to the WBC. He calls Mauricio Solomon and he tells him what to do. Everything that happened with this WBC belt was well planned and thought out by Canelo and the WBC. Remember, Canelo was fighting Caleb Smith for what? The WBA belt, I believe, right? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the WBC had nothing to do with the belt. Remember, Canelo originally was going to move up to 168 and fight Yildirim for the vacant WBC belt, but because DAZN thought that was such a mismatch, they rejected the fight. Canelo, he went through his little lawsuit, and after that, he decided to fight Caleb Smith for his title. Now, pay attention to how slick the WBC and Canelo Alvarez are. The WBC, they knew that if Canelo decided to fight Caleb Smith, because remember, Canelo said he wants to unify all of the belts. If he fights Caleb Smith, then that means the WBC would have to have two other people fight for the vacant WBC belt, because Canelo can't fight for the vacant belt anymore now that he's already the WBA champion. And who's the number one contender when it comes to the WBC? It's David Benavidez. So he's number one. Yildirim is ranked number 2. So that means the way things were supposed to play out, Canelo was supposed to get the WBA belt, and then Benavidez and Yildirim, they would fight for the vacant belt. We already know David would destroy Yildirim, and then he would have the belt. But the WBC, this is why they decided to just hand over the belt to Canelo Alvarez. Just hand it to him. You don't even have to fight for it. Just hand it to him. Have you guys ever seen a play like this, where a champion or a fighter, he's fighting for one belt? For example, he's fighting for the WBC belt, right? He's fighting a champion for the WBC belt, and then the IBF president just says, you know what? Even though we have nothing to do with this fight, here, just go ahead and take the IBF belt too. No, you don't have to fight anyone for it. Just go ahead and take it. I mean, it ain't doing nothing but just sitting over here on the shelf as a vacant belt. So I might as well just give it to you since you're already getting the WBC belt. Have you ever seen something like that happen in the sport of boxing? It only happens when it comes to Canelo Alvarez and the WBC. They wanted to protect Canelo Alvarez They wanted to guarantee or secure the best chance of getting Canelo Alvarez all of the belts that he's seeking for. Because if, once again, David would have got his belt back, Canelo wouldn't have went through David so he could unify all the belts. Remember, guys, when David Benavidez was the WBC champion, Canelo Alvarez never had any interest in that belt. Did you ever hear any reports of Canelo saying he wants to move up to 168 and fight for the WBC belt? Never, right? As soon as David Benavidez was stripped of the title, that's when Canelo Alvarez contacted the WBC and said, put me in there with Yildirim so I could fight for that vacant belt. Guys, this is the same thing that Canelo did when he was at 154 with Demetrius Andrade. Andrade is the champion. He's literally calling Canelo Alvarez a bitch. No, I'm not just making that up. Andrade got on camera and said, man, you're a bitch. What type of fighter doesn't want to fight for a title? I'm the champion. Why don't you want to come fight the champion? He's saying all of this, right? Canelo Alvarez has no interest in fighting for the belt. Soon as Andrade gets stripped of the title, he fights for it right away against Liam Smith. I'm going to keep hitting you guys with the facts. I don't care how much you Canelo Alvarez fans cry. I don't care how racist you get. You can say whatever you want. It ain't going to stop the truth. It ain't going to stop the truth. I'm telling you guys, man, it's bad for you right now. For all you guys trying to defend Canelo Alvarez with all the ridiculous talking points, it's really bad for you guys. Because the majority of professional boxers and trainers that have been corroborating everything that I say are Mexican trainers and pros. Almost everything you heard me say about Canelo Alvarez, we've heard it from Mexican legends like Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez, Eric Morales, right? We even heard Marcos Maidana. He said, man, Canelo needs to fight Charlo. No one is agreeing with the stuff you guys are saying in the comment section. Because deep down, you guys know that everything we're saying makes sense. The truth always makes sense. But because deep down, you guys fear that Canelo Alvarez may possibly lose to a Charlo or an Andrade, you're going to keep making up stuff that logically makes no sense. But it's okay though, because the truth keeps smacking you in your damn face. That's the only reason why they say this stuff. They know the truth, guys. They're not that stupid. These fans know the truth deep down. Because we all know it makes absolutely no sense to not have a problem with Canelo fighting Rocky Fielding or Avni Yildirim, but then have a problem with fighting the most dangerous fighters like Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or even David Benavidez. We all know what time it is. Saying ridiculous things like who has he fought, that makes absolutely no sense. When Canelo Alvarez beat Austin Trout, Canelo had never fought anyone, but he beat Austin Trout, right? That's usually what happens when you have a situation where there is a changing of the guards, right? That's how someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience ends up getting experience. You get in there with the guys that have more experience than you. The logic that these decafs use to say something like, well, how can you say that that's a 50-50 fight? Who is Charlo fought? If you're basing your predictions on who people have fought, then hell, that means Sean Porter, he's going to beat everybody from this point on. That means Sean Porter should have beat Errol Spence because Sean Porter had already been in there with more names than Errol Spence. The logic you guys use, it makes no sense. And the reason why it makes no sense is because you're basing things off of race. You're race talking. You're not talking boxing, you're talking race and pride. And that talk ain't no match for the whole truth. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Listen, I'm telling you guys right now, in the world that we live in today, one of the most important things in life to have is a good lawyer. And I can vouch for this one right here because this brother is my personal lawyer. So if you need any type of legal representation, if you need legal advice, if you're having problems on YouTube, on your regular job, or whatever it is, contact Issa Israel Law Firm. I've been knowing this man for years, and he has been a true blessing to me. I'm telling you, he's affordable, he will work with you, but most importantly, he's not going to just treat you like a customer. He will have your best interest. I'll put the link in the description box so you guys can get in contact with him. All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo Key Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodekey.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called scalp micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So if you want to get this hookup for my brothers out there in the UK and Europe, make sure you check out the Scalp This on Instagram. And for my brothers out there in the States, make sure you go ahead and contact my man Scalp Carolinas on Instagram.